Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where we recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and it's the 22nd of December, 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So, finally, SBF is in FBI custody, and he is being extradited to the US from the Bahamas. He didn't last there very long, and I don't think it's hard to tell why. The Bahamian prisons are not great. I'm sure you guys have seen the pictures of them, and SBF was probably begging to be extradited because of that. He definitely does not want to be staying in those prisons while he awaits kind of his long-term fate there, but definitely wants to be at home in the US because he is an American citizen here, or US citizen here. But that's not the only news that came out today. The Block reported on this, along with a bunch of other media outlets, that Caroline Allison and Gary Wang, who were working closely with SBF, basically as part of that inner circle, have turned on SBF basically completely in a plea deal, essentially. So the details are kind of scarce, and there hasn't been confirmation on certain details, but according to a few outlets, Caroline Allison's plea deal involves no charges against her for her role in the collapse or all the fraud that went on in FTX, as long as she provides all the information she has on SBF and all the other kind of insiders there. And I'm assuming Gary Wang would have gotten a similar plea deal there. Now, this was kind of obvious, and I think that we all expected this to happen, considering that you want to go after the inner circle, you want to get as much evidence as possible from them, and the easiest way to do that is basically to promise them that they're not going to get in trouble if they give all that information away, and they definitely folded on SBF pretty much straight away. Now, in saying that, there was also a report that Caroline could still be charged with tax-related offenses. I'm not sure exactly what those are, but that was in the report too. But it seems like the FTX kind of inner circle is just turning on each other, which definitely, as I said, doesn't come as a surprise. I don't think to many people, considering the plea deal that's being offered here. I mean, really, it doesn't matter how loyal you are to someone, unless you're basically in love with them, or unless they're kind of like a partner, and even then it can be tricky. But if someone, or if the authorities offer you a plea deal where you don't face any charges and you don't face any jail time, as long as you turn on everyone else, well, you're pretty much going to do it, especially if you're facing up to life in prison for the crimes that you have committed. Now, is this fair? No, I don't think so, to be honest. I think that people like Caroline and Gary should definitely serve time and have punishments brought against them for their role in this whole thing. But again, that's not obviously up to me to decide. This is up to the US authorities to decide. And they're going to, I mean, their lives are pretty much over anyway. There's no way they can do anything again. I mean, they're going to have lifetime bans on certain things they can do in the financial sector. I'd be very surprised if anyone legitimate wants to give them money. And, the laundry list of things they won't be able to do, from here on out is quite lengthy. So even if they don't go to prison, and even if they don't face those criminal charges that SBF is facing, their lives are still pretty much destroyed by their own actions. Now, there are debates around this, and there's a few debates in the Daily Gwei Discord channel about this, about if we should be rooting for these actors to be punished and rooting for them, for the state to punish them. And it's funny that these discussions get brought up because crypto was founded on being, I guess, like anti-government and anti-state and cypherpunk and all that kind of stuff there with Bitcoin. But I've always thought that Ethereum doesn't really share that same sentiment. I think with Ethereum is that we want to create a freer world from not just nation states and governments, but just in general. We want to create a freer, more open, more decentralized world. But we would like to work with these governments and nation states. We would like to work with these different bodies around the world, rather than try and resist them at all costs, right? And I think the reason why the Ethereum community is probably more on that side than the hardcore anti-government side is because it's more realistic. And I mean, the Bitcoiners, the hardcore ones, still believe that Bitcoin is going to be the end of the US dollar, right? When I don't think that's going to happen at all. And I think the US dollar is going to be incredibly strong. I don't think any of these cryptocurrencies, the ones that actually are currencies, are going to replace the US dollar as a reserve currency, at least not anytime soon. And I believe that they can live alongside, and they do live alongside the US dollar while still being incredibly valuable and incredibly useful in their own right. So yeah, I think it's just a pragmatist versus hardcore ideology kind of view. And I think the Bitcoiners have always been very hardcore about their ideology, which is fine. I mean, it's helped Bitcoin to survive until this point. But I think that if you look at the way Ethereum tackles things, I definitely see a lot more pragmatism there. I definitely see a lot more openness to working with governments and nation states and making sure that we push back where pushback is warranted when they do certain things. Obviously, like the OFAC sanctions, right? We push back on that. But in saying that, we'd rather kind of work with them on a solution rather than resisting them so much that they just want to keep attacking us, right, and keep coming at us. So it's a different mindset there. But rolling that back into what I was saying about the people behind the FTX collapse, all the insiders, SBF, Caroline, Gary, and everyone else. It's not up to me or you guys what happens with them, like how they get punished here. I think that white collar crime generally doesn't get punished as severely as it should, to be honest, considering that there are a lot of people that get hurt by these actions. And that's the way I look at it. I look at the actions that these people took. Was it intentional? Intent is always incredibly important here. And if it was, and if I believe it was intentional, I mean, you have to prove that. That's like the crux of every good court case, right? You have to actually prove that the intent was there to do that, to do something bad, unless the defendant wants to just plead guilty to everything, as an open book. But usually they don't do that. You have to prove that they had intent to do that bad thing. Now, a lot of the time, it's very hard to prove that, right? Because there's a multitude of different things that go into a court case, and there's a lot of different evidence, there's character witnesses, there's all this stuff that goes on. But I think tying it back to FTX here, the thing that's got SBF is that his insiders are turning on him and giving all this evidence, probably giving the prosecutors everything they need to have like an ironclad case against SBF and to send him away for a long time here. But usually it's quite difficult, especially with white collar crime, to prove that their intent was to defraud people, was to take money from people and actually hurt them. Whereas a lot of the time they don't really necessarily are out there trying to hurt people. Like, for example, in the financial crimes, world, a lot of the time they're just trying to enrich themselves and they're stepping over people to get there. But their primary intent isn't to cause harm to people. Their primary intent is to make themselves rich, and they're doing that via causing harm to people. So it gets even murkier from there. And as you can see, it can get very very complex. But I think with the FTX case, it's basically cut and dry with SBF and especially with all the evidence that has already come out and more that will come out now that the insiders are turning on him. Obviously, I think that he should get either a fair trial or a fair kind of, I guess, like settlement deal, and should be treated fairly by the law, even though he did something wrong, because I do believe that every human has a right to that. But in saying that, like, this is not me defending him at all, obviously. This is me basically saying that there's a lot of different nuance that goes into this. There's a lot of different things that go into this. And whether you believe someone should be punished by the state and thrown into a cage, whether you believe that's right or wrong, I think is mostly irrelevant here, because we don't really have control over that. It's basically up to the state. And if you want, I guess, like, if you want to see change in that, you have to change that at the political level, where you can vote in politicians that want to reform the criminal justice system, which, to be fair, the criminal justice system in the US especially definitely needs reform. I mean, it's pretty bad, like, especially all the low-level drug-related offenses that people get put away for many years, like the weed offenses, right? Like, that's always been mind-boggling to me. And Australia is not much better. Weed is illegal here at the federal level, and I think it's at the state level. It's legal in some circumstances, like medicinal, but it's definitely very locked down still. But we don't have the same, I guess, like, prosecutions for those offenses as the US does. And yeah, I don't agree with that at all, right? I agree. I generally agree with, like, if you're proven to do such a bad crime, or a crime that hurts so many people, then yeah, of course you should be punished for that. But I mean, just smoking weed on your own, like just having a bit of weed to smoke on your own, that's not harming anyone, right? And I think obviously if you're dealing in it as well, it's a different story, because there's the quantity that you have it depends on the quantity that you have, the punishment with that. But I guess, like, I'm getting off the rails a bit here. But yeah, I get, whenever I look at these things, I just look at, does the punishment fit the crime and the amount of people that were harmed? And SBF harmed millions of people. So really the punishment should be quite severe for that. And I think that the punishment thing, and this is just the last thing I'll say about this, doesn't just serve as a way to punish the actor that did it, but it serves as a deterrent. And we've needed deterrence in crypto for a long time because crypto is full of scammers. The reason I believe a big reason why there's been so many is because there hasn't actually been that many prosecutions of scammers. And the thing with SBF is that he didn't really, he's not one of those traditional scammers that you see, the ones that do the pump and dump ICOs and all that. Right, he committed fraud as part of a legitimate company that that people thought he was running. Right, and well, I mean the company wasn't legitimate, but people thought it was a legitimate company. So it's a bit of a different situation there. But I think that the more that people get pinged for this sort of stuff, the more people that get that the governments go after, the more it scares off these scammers. Because unfortunately, the crypto ecosystem has not really been able to self-regulate at all. We just keep having more and more of these scammers, and they keep getting bigger and bigger each cycle. So I would love to see a world where we don't have to worry about this anymore, and that's my hope for the future. But we'll see. Maybe the government isn't the best entity to help with this, but we'll have to see in the future. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that for today on that news front. There's a bunch of other things to get through. So first up is an update from StakeWise here. So they put out a tweet where they said, the way you stake today may not be the way you stake in 2023. It is time to take a deep dive into osETH, an over-collateralized staked ETH token that powers StakeWise V3 and enables new ways to stake in a decentralized and permissionless fashion. And there's a blog post here about osETH and also a tweet thread. So I guess like the TLDR of what is osETH, it's a representation of ETH that was staked and earned in a marketplace of vaults, liquid staking mini pools that accept ETH deposits and run StakeWise V3 validators. Every osETH is a portion of the total stake, like a slice of a V3 pie. And then they've got a nice graphic here showing this. Basically, one ETH goes in, gets converted to one osETH. Beacon chain rewards to StakeWise validators gets added to that. One osETH then can be turned into 1.1 ETH, which is that 10% profit coming from the beacon chain rewards after a certain period of time. So it's a pretty, I guess, like standard LSD loop here that we're used to. And I've talked about how StakeWise V3 is trying to be a lot more like something like Rocket Pool rather than like a centralized LSD, which is obviously very awesome to see. But if you want to learn more about osETH and the entire architecture around it, definitely give this tweet thread and blog post a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. And there's a bunch of nice graphics as well for you to check out that may make things easier to understand as well. All right, an update out of Optimism today. So on January 12th, Optimism's Görli testnet is migrating to Bedrock. Most users and apps won't be impacted by the upgrade, and Optimism are working with node operators to ensure a smooth migration. And you can check the blog post for full details on this and read on for the hype. So I remember them being Optimism saying that Bedrock was due to launch in late Q4. It seems that that's not going to be the case. It seems that they're going to be launching in Q1 now. So you can see here the steps. Jan 12th is the testnet migration. Optimism governance will vote on a mainnet upgrade proposal, and then Q1 will be a mainnet migration to Bedrock. So Bedrock is the major upgrade, basically Optimism's version of Arbitrum Nitro in terms of how major of an upgrade it is for the protocol here. And after the Bedrock upgrade, as Optimism says here, the Optimism mainnet will offer the lowest possible L1 data fees. No other rollups have figured out how to get these fees lower. So we'll have to check them on that once Bedrock is out. And the Optimism network will also be able to support multiple execution clients. So great, obviously, for client diversity there. And Bedrock also future-proofs the proof system on Optimism. So Optimism will be able to incorporate multiple proof mechanisms, including ZK proofs. No need to wait for a ZK breakthrough to deploy on Optimism. When ZK tech is ready, you'll be able to use it for your project. So obviously, a massive upgrade here coming from Optimism. As I said, like the date was supposed to be late Q4, but I mean, I always thought late Q4 is kind of a funny window of time to do something in because it's the holiday period. So it makes much more sense that it's happening in Q1 on Jan 12th when people are back on deck. I'm for sure think that, or at least I would assume that a lot of the Optimism team is taking a break for the holiday. So they definitely want to have as many people on board as possible when they do both the testnet and mainnet migrations, and that's why it's happening in Q1 now, which is totally fine. I mean, there's not really any rush here. As I've said before, because the demand right now is quite low, and because we have time during the bear market to build out these things. There's no real rush. But in saying that, I love that Bedrock is going to come out very soon here. And I just reminded myself, thinking about Arbitrum Nitro, is that Arbitrum Odyssey still hasn't been re-enabled. I'm not sure when they're going to re-enable it. I honestly expected it to come soon after Nitro was deployed, and I'm not sure what they're waiting for, so maybe someone else knows. I haven't seen any updates on it, but it's a bit disappointing that they haven't re-enabled it, because that was a really cool thing that was driving a lot of people to Arbitrum. But again, I mean, there's no real rush, really. I mean, they can re-enable it whenever they want, of course, but I think we want to keep this L2 momentum up in 2023, like we saw in 2022, and with Optimism Bedrock going live, with other upgrades coming to Optimism and Arbitrum next year, and obviously all the ZK stuff happening as well with the other teams, it's going to be an amazing year for layer 2s on Ethereum outside of what we're used to. That's for sure. Anyway, you can go check out this update from Optimism. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. All right, so speaking of L2s, David Schwartz from the Polygon Hermez team put out a tweet today where he said, the new public.zkEVM-test.net is out. ZK proof recursion has been enabled. L2 batch size increased from 4 to 10 million gas. Proof time reduced from 10 to 4 minutes. L1 verification with 350,000 gas. This adds more efficiency and ability to manage the trade-off between finality time and transaction costs. So a major update that's actually come here for Polygon's zkEVM testnet that they're currently that's currently public and currently live for people to play around with. And this is actually a pretty huge upgrade. I mean, when we really look at each of these points here, ZK proof recursion being enabled is a pretty big deal. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it. I mean, it gets quite technical, but from my reading, it is definitely a very big deal. The L2 batch size being increased from 4 to 10 million gas is definitely like more than a 2x increase here. The proof times being reduced from 10 to 4 minutes is huge. It's a 60% reduction in proof times, right? And L1 verification with using just 350,000 gas. Now, I've talked about this before about how L1 is limited by the amount of gas it can process. As a gas limit of technically 30 million gas because of EIP 1559, but in practice it's 15 million gas per block or per slot now within the proof of stake world. So the lower you get that, the less expensive your transaction is going to be. And you want the L1 verification to be as cheap as possible and get the best bang for your buck. So I'm sure they're going to keep optimizing that and keep getting that down as much as possible to get the overall costs down here, which is obviously very, very awesome. But as I said before, the 2023 is going to be a bigger year for L2s, not just the existing ones that we're used to using like Optimism and Arbitrum, but also all the zkEVM stuff. I mean, I think if 2022 was the year of Optimism and Arbitrum in the L2 space, 2023 will be the year of the zkEVM. But as I've said before, Optimism and Arbitrum are both working towards being able to do ZK proofs as well. So and it basically makes them a zkEVM anyway. I mean, not to the strict definition that we're used to, but if they have ZK proofs instead of fraud proofs implemented and they are EVM compatible / equivalent, you're getting a similar experience as an end user, regardless of the technical accuracy there. So that's super exciting. I mean, that's what I'm most excited about next year, to be honest, because when you think about the upgrades coming to the Ethereum core protocol, we have withdrawals, obviously very excited about that, but I mean, that's been talked to death and that's happening in like March and April, and it's basically just a formality at this point. It's not something that anyone's really kind of expecting to create any dramas or anything like that. It's just something that we get delivered and we move on. It's an expected thing. And then we have EIP 4844, which is the next major upgrade coming next year. But that's a L2 specific upgrade. It really just only benefits L2s, but I say only, but that's underselling it, obviously, because I've talked about how much the end users are going to get a benefit from it. So, and that's going to... That's going to apply to both Optimistic and ZK rollups, of course. But that's why 2023, I think, is going to be bigger for L2s than 2022. And I am kind of expecting more demand next year than there has been this year. I think 2022 was 2018. And it's funny because if ETH bottomed in June, like if ETH doesn't actually go back to its bottom price of $880, that means that ETH bottomed in 6 months. Whereas in the last bear market, it took 12 months for both ETH and Bitcoin to bottom. Now, Bitcoin set a new low last month with the FTX collapse, which means it took its almost normal amount of time from the last cycle to test its to set a new bottom, right? And maybe that's not the perma bottom. I'm not obviously sure, but it's really kind of weird when you look at it like that. It really does mean that ETH bottomed 6 months into its bear market, and obviously this whole year has been very bearish. But what if we start getting demand coming back next year? What if next year is 2019 and there are trickles of demand that come back in? I mean, a lot of people forget this, but in 2019, Bitcoin actually doubled in price. It didn't stay flat on the year. ETH stayed flat on the year, and I'm talking from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, because actually in 2019, what we ended up having was ETH going from like $100 to $360. But I'm talking about maintaining it for that year. Bitcoin actually doubled from the start of the year to the end of the year, and ETH stayed flat, which was very different now to where ETH has seemed to have bottomed only 6 months into the bear market, and ETH may end up doubling next year and holding it, sort of thing. Like, so I'm not totally sure. I've talked about this echo bubble that people have talked about over the past few weeks and how I think it's more hopium than anything else, but it's just fascinating to see the different market dynamics here and how that's going to play into the demand side of things like L2s. But I'll digress on that point, but very, very excited for these updates that have been coming out, got to do with L2s recently. All right, so Harpie had an interesting tweet thread that I just wanted to highlight for you guys, where they said, this is the first on-chain crime drama where the good guys finally win. Here's a thread on how Harpie stopped a private key theft for one of our users. So for those of you who don't know, just a refresher, Harpie is an on-chain firewall for your Ethereum wallet. I have highlighted them before on the Refuel. Basically, it allows you to set an allowed list of what contracts and what, I guess, apps you want to interact with on-chain. And then if you try to interact with something that falls out of the scope of that, it'll basically block that transaction and put like a hard block on it and tell you that you can't do it. And then you can obviously add it to your allow list if you want to. So it's like a firewall for your on-chain activity, which I think is a pretty cool, definitely a very cool a tool for people to use here. But continuing on with this thread, they said, a few days ago, the Harpie team received an urgent Discord message from one of their users. They suspected that their private key was stolen. Their suspicion was correct, and the hacker started attempting to transfer assets out of the wallet. But as soon as the hacker sent the transfer, suddenly the transaction failed. Transfer amount exceeds balance. For some reason, the tokens were no longer in the wallet. Instead, the tokens were sent to a special smart contract. This contract allowed the victim to recover their lost tokens from a different, uncompromised wallet. Even though the hacker was able to steal the key, they were unable to steal the tokens inside. How did this happen? Well, about a month ago, this user protected their tokens with Harpie. By approving and protecting their tokens with Harpie, this user gave Harpie permission to intervene if we ever spotted a theft on their wallet. When Harpie detected the malicious transfer, Harpie moved this user's funds to a non-custodial vault before that transaction could confirm. By paying a higher gas fee, Harpie's transfer executed first and negated the theft. Harpie has stopped hundreds of thefts and has recovered over $700,000 in assets, and they are the first on-chain firewall for keeping your assets safe. This is really, really cool, guys. There's not only is a firewall, this is like an Iron Dome. And for those of you who don't know what the Iron Dome is, it's basically a US military defense, missile defense system that I believe Iran uses, where it's basically, it's not a literal Iron Dome, but it's set up all around the perimeter in Iran, and it will basically act as a missile defense system, and it's really good. From what I've read about it, it's actually very, very effective against the missiles. But you can think of like Harpie as that. It's like an Iron Dome over your Ethereum wallet essentially, and protects you from these sorts of things. Like protecting you from having your private key stolen is amazing, because like when traditionally you would think that when your private key gets stolen or when someone gets your seed phrase, that's it. There's nothing else you can do except race them to get the tokens out of your wallet. But because Harpie detected this and was able to move those assets into a uncompromised non-custodial vault for the user with another wallet that they had set up for this, that is obviously very, very cool and very important, and something that is very, very useful. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that for you guys. I think what Harpie is building is incredibly cool and going to be keeping a lot of users safe as time goes on. All right, so Superfluid announced over the weekend that Superfluid is now available, or not over the weekend, sorry, I should say yesterday, that Superfluid is now available on Ethereum mainnet in early access for selected partners. Over the past 2 years of experimenting across 6 different L2s, thanks to our strong ecosystem of builders, we are excited to bring Superfluid to all OG projects on the Ethereum mainnet here. So Basically, the select projects that have been integrated with Superfluid on mainnet right now are just a few. I think they have like an Airtable here that you can use to sign up. If you're an app that wants to sign up and get early access to Superfluid, yeah, you can kind of sign up on this this form here and choose which network you're on, because they are on L2s, but now they're obviously on Ethereum mainnet. But yeah, this is very cool because I mean, I should disclose I'm an investor in Superfluid, but I think, as I've said before, like, payments is that use case that, I mean, it feels like we're there, but like we're not there. Like, we're there in terms of having some of the core infrastructure in place to do payments, but we're still running into issues like UI and UX stuff and scale and turnkey solutions for apps to integrate with. And that's where Superfluid comes in to integrate with these different apps and say to them, hey, you can do payments with us. You can do streaming payments with us for things like subscriptions and salaries and all the other good stuff. And you can do them in any token on Ethereum or any on all these L2s, and they'll basically provide the solution for that. So I think it's a very important piece of infrastructure that is probably under the radar right now. And I think payments generally are, because people expect payments to just work. It's not something you really think about too much. Like when you tap your card, or when you pay for something, when you pay in cash, it's like a thing you're very much accustomed to, and it's very normal. It's very streamlined for you, and that's what Superfluid is trying to do for on-chain payments, is make it as streamlined as possible to do anything you want with the payments infrastructure, but making it easy for apps to integrate with it instead of the apps having to build it from scratch themselves. So cool to see them live on the Ethereum mainnet. You can go check out their thread for a bit more information on this. All right, we have an update from XMTP here. They've got a mobile SDK out for now available in developer preview. So this release enables client apps in Flutter, React Native, and Swift, and you can check out the repos here. So this is obviously one for the developers out there. But for those who don't know what XMTP is, it is a protocol for Web3 messaging. And I should disclose I'm an investor in XMTP as well. But I wanted to highlight this for any developers out there that are interested in working with XMTP and working with their mobile SDKs. They're now available in developer preview for you to check out. I'll link this in the YouTube description below, and you can go check it out. All right, finally here, I just wanted to highlight that I had an amazing conversation with Whack Attack from the Rocket Pool community today. I love saying that name, Whack Attack. It rolls off the tongue, right? But the conversation went for quite a while, actually. I think it was about an hour and a half that we spoke for, and we spoke about all things Ethereum, Rocket Pool, my history in the space, and obviously Wack's history in the space as well. And honestly, I said this on the episode with him as well, and I've said this to a few friends. There are very few people in this ecosystem that I have come across where I can talk to them and feel like we're literally on the same wavelength about the Ethereum core protocol. Like, there are certain other things that I talk to other people about and I'm aligned on, but there are definitely very few people that I feel very aligned with in terms of like everything, in terms of where we're thinking. It's like I'm talking to myself, so to speak. Wack is one of them, and there's been a few others out there. I'm not going to name them all. I don't want to dox them or anything like that. But that's why the conversation was so fun for me and so amazing for me, because it was just a streamlined conversation. There was no umming or ahhing. There was no disagreements on anything that we couldn't kind of add nuance to. Like, we did disagree on things, but we added nuance to it, and we basically came to the same conclusion in the end anyway, and we understood each other's points. I don't know. I had a lot of fun in the conversation, and it is live for you to go check out, and I highly recommend going and checking it out, not just for my commentary, but for Wack's commentary as well, because he has a lot of great insight into all things Ethereum, but also Rocket Pool. I mean, he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Rocket Pool, because he does his daily Rocket Fuel show, which covers the updates from the Rocket Pool community, which is amazing to me that he's able to put together a video on just Rocket Pool, right? I do, the Ethereum ecosystem at large, but he does just Rocket Pool, and it really provides a lot of value to the Rocket Pool community in him doing that. And he said the Daily Gwei was an inspiration for him to do that, which was obviously heartwarming for me, and to see people kind of using my content as inspiration for their own. But yeah, go check it out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But on that note, that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.